me being technologically challenged, so we're okay. Right? They don't care because they know I am not the most techie person in the world. So live from Las Vegas. Yay. This is Gwen.
Hi.
Huh? Yes, this is Gwendolyn Weiler, editor extraordinaire, editor of my fabulously wonderful book that wouldn't have been fabulously wonderful without her.
Thank you.
So I felt you guys all needed to know her because there's an author in all of you. I know there is. I know there is. Okay, because I didn't know there was an author in me until I actually met Gwen and talked to her for a little bit, and she pulled that out. So there's an author in all of you as well, and Gwen can bring that out. So I wanted you all to meet her. So Gwen.
Hi.
Tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, so yes, I'm an editor. I'm an editor and a writer. I knew I wanted to be a writer the moment I knew there was a word for this thing inside of me. I just love words. I love working with people's messages and feeling them. So that's what I do professionally. In my spare time, I am a full-time toddler wrangler. I have a 3-year-old named RJ who keeps me on my toes, very busy, and yeah, so all around I feel like I am stretched professionally and stretched personally in good ways that always make me grow.
Awesome, awesome. So what made you decide you suddenly wanted to be an editor?
So it was actually my senior year of high school. I had an opportunity to be a co-editor-in-chief of our literary magazine, and I loved the process. You know, I had always known I wanted to do writing. That was my first experience with editing and, you know, touching other people's words and trying to help them make them better. And I loved the process. I knew that was the life for me. And after that, I kind of looked at maybe getting into the magazine industry or something. And just over time, it just settled. Like, books was what I wanted to do. And by the time I graduated college, I still didn't really know how to get into it. I graduated with my degree in journalism, wasn't really sure how to get into the book industry, and I just got a lucky break. I was very blessed to have some amazing mentors. Lane Cunningham was one of many editors I contacted, and she was the only one who responded back that said, I'll answer any question you have. And so yeah, and just through that process, I just was, like I said, blessed with mentors, and I always try to reciprocate now. You know, if anybody has questions trying to get into the industry, I always try to hold those hands and help them the way someone helped me.
And help you she did. Let me tell you, my book was not all that, well, it was not very well put together at all. It was just a bunch of scattered thoughts on paper, and she made it cohesive and coherent and marketable. Okay, marketable.
Yeah, and you mentioned that everybody has an author in them, you know, and similarly with you, your thoughts, you know, they were all there, and I really didn't do much to add. I really feel like, you know, the gift I brought to you was helping you organize them so that your gift could really shine through and you could share the message that you already were sharing, and just making it, you know, make it whole.
So what does it take? I mean, it's a good way to put this. I brought you a bunch of jumbled thoughts on paper. Okay. Mm-hmm. What's the easiest way for someone to actually get to the point where they could, how do we get that person out? How do we get that author, that thing that we have rattling around in our heart, in our soul, and get it out on paper so that we can bring it to you and go, Gwen, make it something?
I think sometimes it's conversations like this, you know, questions that people ask you all of a sudden have an answer to, you know how to answer that question. I'm sure partly for you, a lot of your book is comprised of stories, experiences that you had that you shared. And so I think that's part of it, is recognizing that you already have the message, you already have what you want to say. But also I think a part of the disconnect for authors, people who want to write a book, often the disconnect is that they have a message, which is it's a shapeless thing. They know how it feels, but in trying to convert it into a very finite vessel, a book, it's hard, I think, sometimes to know where to start. I think it's hard to know where to go next and where to end. And so that's one beauty of having an editor. You don't always really need to know where to go next. An editor can kind of help you take what you've done and reorganize it for you if necessary. But in terms of getting to that place, I think an outline is a great way to start. I am a big proponent of an outline. A lot of people think that's not creative, and why would they? And it stifles them. Those are usually artists who, you know, they're still trying to write that book. But I would say that the thing about an outline that is so valuable is it helps you already to kind of give you a framework of where to go next. Because again, it is a conversion process. You're converting a message into a finite solid thing that somebody can hold, and that's difficult. So I think first recognizing that your book and your message are not the same thing. Your book really is a vessel to hold your message. And I think the best way to help it take that form is to kind of outline where it's going to go. You know, that outline is so helpful just to help you know where to go next so that you don't get lost in not knowing what to do with it, not knowing what to do with your message.
So I have to admit, one of the things that frightened me a little bit was that you were going to take my words and they suddenly wouldn't be my words. Yeah. Because I write, unfortunately I write, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I guess, I write just like I talk. So there was a lot of probably incomplete sentences and lots of dashes, and I write like I talk, okay? So, and I was afraid you were going to take it and make it some stuffy, stodgy, one of those self-help books that were just, and I didn't want that, because that's not me, that's not my words. And so alleviate everybody's fears that Gwen does not do that, okay? Talk about how you actually take my words and make them sellable and marketable and coherent and without changing my words.
Yeah. So you talked about being marketing, and so I mentioned that first. You know, I think the first key of being marketable is identifying what you want your book to do. That's so important. You know, it's not just a matter of getting it on paper. It's really identifying what you want your book to do, meaning what do you want the reader to do next. Sometimes it's join your organization or hire you as a coach or lose 100 pounds, whatever it is you're trying to inspire them to do, have that at the outset. And I know the industry that you're in a little bit. And so for me, I was always trying to be very sensitive to that, of what you wanted it to do. And I think in your industry, it's very important to be vulnerable, open, and to be personable so that people can talk with you and communicate with you about their fears and moving to the next step. And so part of it for me was keeping in mind what your bigger goals were, but also because you and I have talked, I know who you are. You know, I know your personality. I know what you want to say, and your words are there. Even if you and I had not talked extensively, I read your book. That tells me who you are, because you write the way you speak. I feel like I can imagine what the conversation would be like if you and I were sitting like this, intimately, knee to knee. And I think that's so important. And so I try so hard to preserve that voice. And I feel like one of the ways in which me personally, what it requires of me is to make sure that my ego is not part of the project. Because honestly, sometimes I feel like there's a sentence here or there, not necessarily in your book, but in work that I'm working with. Sometimes I feel like, well, I could have written this paragraph better, but it's not my voice and it's not my project. And so there's two things I always try to do is A, try not to put my ego in there in the first place, and B, always make it very clear to my client that I feel that strongly about my ego, so that if they get to a place where I have changed something that doesn't sit right with them, or they don't feel really echoes where they're coming from, to ditch it, you know, just to throw it out, even if it sounds better. But if it doesn't sound like them, if it doesn't resonate with their voice, let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to what they had and see where we maybe can improve it or just keep it. And so those are a couple of things that I do.
And we talked a lot during the process, which was one of the things I really appreciated. I mean, we've had how many conversations whenever we got to a point in the process was like, okay, we need to talk.
Yeah.
And we would. So that was very important to me. I've never worked with any other editors, but I have heard from some people who have, that they hand off their book and then that's the last they see until the editor comes back and says, okay, it's done. Mm-hmm. We talked all the time.
Yeah.
We actually even met once during the process. Yep. I was in Vegas and we hooked up. So she is, I really appreciate the fact that you were so available.
Sure.
So if somebody wants you to do their book, what exactly do they need? I mean, do they need like the whole formally written, double-spaced, whatever manuscript, or can I just send you thoughts on, if I've been handwriting something in a journal all this time and I said, I want to turn this into a book, can I send that to you? Or what will you accept?
Sure. All of the above. I accept ideas up to manuscripts. You know, you came to me with a finished manuscript that you wanted to improve and make better and make it ready to publish. I've had people come with me and say, there's something I want to say, how do I make it into a book? And we work through that process entirely. So I meet people where they are you know, just bringing their book to completion, whether they need someone to help them write it, someone just to edit it and make it better. I kind of help them with that whole process. And so, so I would say, you know, the price will fluctuate. If you're coming to me and saying, I'm a good speaker, but not a good writer, can you write it for me? That would consist of us doing interviews so that I can capture your voice and your vision and making sure that we're channeling that into the words of those pages. But again, if you have a manuscript that is complete and you just need it to be better, tweaked, then we can work with that too. I've done all of the above.
Awesome. So what makes a book marketable? Because I know there's, well, you just recently did a book for a friend of mine, and she was so terrified that it wasn't any good, and she calls you the miracle worker.
Oh, she's lovely. Yeah, I love. If you're watching, I love you.
Are you out there, Rocio? She was terrified that it wasn't any good, and it was. I mean, by the time you got done with it, it was amazing. So what is that like when someone comes to you and goes, here's this thing that I know is not very good, fix it for me?
I love it. You know, it's an amazing process for me because it's a very intimate process for both of us. You know, I'm seeing parts of you that maybe you didn't even see there. You know, Rocio is actually a great example. Her book is beautiful. Her message is wonderful. If you don't know her, please get to know her. It was a beautiful, beautiful message. And so in working with her material, I saw where we could improve it. I saw where we could, you know, move some things around. Again, my goal always is to help that message come through. You know, in terms of marketing, again, always wondering what do you want to inspire somebody to do? And where do you need to connect with the client? Where do you need to connect with your reader, your audience? And because a lot of times, I think in terms of marketing, you know, I've talked to a lot of writers who feel like their stories aren't relevant to the person that they want to talk to. I recently helped somebody do an outline, and she was like, you know, I have 9 kids. These are my experiences, and I don't know that a lot of people can relate to having 9 children and being married for 20 years and trying to get out of the financial rat race. And I said, you know, maybe they can't. They probably can't. There probably isn't, you know, 50% of the population of our country probably can't relate to those exact bullet points. However, 100% of our population can relate to the feeling of being stuck, the feeling of being sad, the feeling of being desperate, the feeling of being in transition, and all of those feelings. And so that's one thing I always try to bring to the project is where can we heighten the level of emotion and connection, because that's what people can relate to. So if I sit down and I just tell you a story about my life, that's very different than taking you through that journey with me emotionally and saying, this is how it's feeling. These are the things that work. This is where I am today. You know, you always have to be able to tap into that emotion. So emotion is huge. Be vulnerable, be open, and don't be afraid to do that. Because in doing that, you're inviting your reader, your audience to even connect more deeply with you emotionally, with their vulnerabilities. So that's so, so important. I'm trying to remember the second half of that question. I kind of get lost in my own thoughts. Oh, and so with Rocio, again, you know, in terms of that connection, it is, to me, that process, I love it so much. It's so beautiful to me because I feel like I get to show people who they are. I think sometimes we're going through our life and we have these big aha moments and we're like, yes, this, I have to share it. And we think this is the one thing that we have to share. You know, maybe there's not a whole lot else, but this one thing we're ready to share. And I see this a lot in the authors I work with. They go to share it and they totally discount the things that they had to share before that aha moment. And so much of what you already are carrying with you, you know, that is the crutch of the thing that you want to share. And so I think just never discount the experiences you've had even up to that aha moment, and be sure to pull those in and rely on them, because you are probably way more amazing and way more interesting than you realize now.
And I'm going to put in a shameless plug for Rocio's book, since you've been hearing about it all this time. It's Feathers in a Blender, and it's on Amazon. Go get it. It's wonderful.
Yes, do. And again, just to plug Rocio, it changed my perspective. It came across my path at the time that I needed it. And there's still parts of that book that I'll go back to and just flip open and reread, because they really meant a lot to me.
So if somebody, let's talk about the process a little bit, because I'm sure it's a little bit different process. If I came to you with a finished manuscript, so I just came to you and said, here it is, fix it. Mm-hmm. And you did. Okay, so if somebody wants to do that, what's the whole process? I mean,
sure. So my process, it's still very much a joint process, as you know, we work on it together. So what I do first, the first thing I do is I read through the whole thing. Some people are like, send it back to me chapter by chapter. Never, because for me, it's like surgery. I'm going in, I read the whole project first to get a big picture. And that gives me, again, those points, what are you trying to do? Where do you want to go? Who are you talking to? And I'm always asking those questions. And then I kind of make some small notes as I go. And then after I read it, I meet with the author and say, okay, these are the changes I'd like to make. How do you feel about that? And I don't know if you remember, I gave you the outline that was like, here's your original outline. This is what I want to do with it. And we had totally, it looked like Frankenstein. I want to put chapter 8 here and part of chapter 1 here. Everything was all mixed up. But so I kind of create that map of, this is where we are with your project. This is where I'd like to take your project. These are the recommendations I have. How do you feel about, me moving forward with these changes? And any change I make, whether it's putting in a period or taking out a comma, I'm always tracking those changes in Word so that you can see what I did, and you always have the option to accept or reject what I've done. Whether that's moving a chapter or inserting a line or two, sometimes I feel like maybe there's a transition needed, and I'll just type that out for you as a suggestion, which you're welcome to keep or not. But yeah, so again, I'm always just trying to keep that end in mind. And then so from there, we just kind of go back and forth. I give you the manuscript back with those notes once you kind of green lighted me making some of those bigger changes. And then once you get it back, you can review the changes I've made and then accept or reject them. Hopefully if there's some things I've asked you to do in terms of maybe filling out sections, maybe we need to add stories or support with, research or data, that will be kind of your opportunity to go in and fill in those holes. And then it comes back to me. And again, I'm just kind of, reviewing the things you've added and seeing, is that sufficient for this hole? Is that, does it create another problem? Sometimes, bringing in research then is like, oh, well, let's add this also. So yeah, it's kind of a dialogue. We kind of go back and forth on that, but usually the manuscript will go back and forth 2 or 3 times before the author is like, yep, this is good. And at that point, I make my final edits. I give it to them to make their final edits. And once they're like, this is it, this is where I want to be, we move forward with the proofread, and I refer them out to publishing options, depending on what they want to do with it.
And I rejected some of her ideas, and she didn't have a meltdown or anything. She was okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so important to me. Some editors I think get a little, and I'm not thinking of anybody in particular, but I think anytime you're touching a project that intimately, it's easy to feel very personal about it, and but again, I just try so hard to make sure my ego is never part of it, because what you want to say is way more important than anything I ever want to say or want you to say.
Okay, so if my ideas aren't that fleshed out, if I don't have a finished manuscript, I'm sure the process is a little bit different. So if I just have notes in a journal or an idea in my head or an outline, how does the process differ?
Okay, so what we do is we start with the conversation about what you want to do with your book, what you want it to be, and why you want to write it. And again, that kind of points us in the direction of creating that outline to help guide you through that process. And then also, I have a lot of people, like I said, who don't already recognize how awesome they are. And so we start with the conversation. Just let's talk about your experiences. Let's talk about what you want to put in the book. Let's talk about what you have thought about putting in the book and don't want to put in the book. And then from there, I can kind of create an outline. For instance, sometimes there are questions that you don't realize first. So here's one quick way that I always like to help people write an outline who don't know where to start. So if you're trying to figure that out, my advice to you is think of 10 problems that are currently facing your reader, the reader that you have in mind. What are the 10 problems facing them? And if you could think of those, in your instance, you're working a lot with business owners or people who are, wanting to get into that space. So you probably could think of, tell me now, what are 3 things you could think of that are facing people that you would talk to right now?
Lack of recruits for their teams,
okay.
Lack of customers for their products, and an inability that once they have a team together, attrition is horrible. They don't know how to build a strong team and keep it together.
Okay, those are probably vital parts of building a business successfully. Could you think of 10 if I had you do 10?
Oh, probably.
Probably. Okay, if you come up with those 10 questions, bam, you have an outline. And that's a good place to start. That's a really good place to start. And so asking those questions will help you to recognize the questions that you have to work to answer. And that's really what you're doing. I mean, often, the book is there to fill a need, to answer a question, to point them in a direction and give a solution. So let's find the problems first and then create that book to be the solution to those problems.
Awesome. So if I wanted to hire you to edit my book, how do I connect with you?
Well, the best way to connect with me, you can go through my website, mybookservices.com, or you can connect me here on Facebook after the end of January, because I'm on a Facebook fast right now. And then also my email address is a great way, gwendolyn.weiler@gmail.com. That's GWENDOLYN.WEILER@gmail.com. Or my phone number always is a good way. Text is probably best, so I don't think you're Google trying to call me to tell me to get a listing. And that my phone number is 803-904-2592.
I feel bad. I made her break her fast because we're live on Facebook.
That's okay. That's okay. I won't see it till later, so no problem.
So you've all met Gwen. Like I said, you all have a book inside of you. I know everybody that I deal with, everybody in my circle, I know has a book inside of you. Some of you have told me that. A couple of you have actually stepped forward and done it with Gwen. So get out there, write that book, write that thing that's in your heart, put it on paper, get it to Gwen, and give it to the world, because the world needs to hear what you have to say.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you so much.